And so you just go ahead and you know the routine.
All right. I turned my phone off so it doesn't ring. I've gotten 2 spam calls just in the last 3 minutes.
There have been tons of them.
Yeah. I am incredibly honored to be a part of this Adult Learning Alliance of Arkansas 50th anniversary celebration. This is a big deal, you guys, a big deal. It's also a personal anniversary for me because I've been involved with ALC for 40 years, since 1982. But it was not just in 82 that I heard about adult literacy issues. Back in the late 60s, early 70s, in my Methodist church in Pine Bluff, I was part of a study of some of Dr. Frank Laubach's early writings. We read one of his books called Letters of a Modern Mystic, and we studied the issue of international adult illiteracy around the world. And we learned about Dr. Frank's Each One Teach One method and all the work he had done around the world. But I never dreamed that it was a problem here in Arkansas. And at that time, I didn't know there was an Arkansas Literacy Council, the predecessor of Adult Learning Alliance. So when I got the phone call in 1982 from a friend of mine in Pine Bluff, she said, there's a group of us who is working with Arkansas Literacy Councils, the state organization, to get a VISTA grant to start a literacy program right here in Arkansas. And we've just gotten news that Margaret Booth, the person who wrote the grant for ALC, has received the grant, and she's getting for Pine Bluff and then 4 others for other cities in Arkansas. And we're chosen because of our high adult illiteracy rate, which at that point was 37% of people who did not read well above the 5th grade level. So when I was offered this, and they said, Barbara, would you please apply? 4 years prior to this, my husband had died very suddenly. And it had been a long, hard struggle, those 4 years. But at that point of my life, I was beginning to feel a new energy. I was beginning to see, okay, this could be a new challenge. And so I accepted the job of VISTA volunteer. And I went to Little Rock to the state office to get sworn in with the other 4 VISTA volunteers from there on the state. We were sworn in. I got home at 2 o'clock. I left at 4 to travel to Dumas because I had been told there was going to be a Laubach Literacy Action tutor workshop in Dumas and that I had to go. So I drove down there. I had never been to a tutor workshop. I knew nothing about this. I walked into the meeting and there was Margaret Booth and Betty Harp, the 2 leaders. And I went through a 12-hour, 2-day training in Dumas to become a Laubach Literacy Action tutor. So I thought, well, this is good information. Good. I now know how. I have the materials provided by Laubach Literacy, the Laubach way to reading, the Laubach way to English, and I could tutor somebody. However, VISTA volunteers are not allowed to provide direct service. My job was not to tutor. Yes, I'd been to the tutor workshop, but that was not my job. My job was to organize a new literacy program, a new nonprofit. So I thought, well, where can I find this information? I called ALC. At this point, Arkansas Literacy, well, first of all, I didn't call ALC because ALC had no office. It had no phone. All I did was call Betty Harp, and then I called several other people who were associated with literacy. We all have had it. I don't know how many literacy councils there were in the state at that point, but they were mostly volunteer. And if they had paid staff, they were like me, a VISTA volunteer. So I called them and I said, I need help. I'm trying to start a literacy council. Will you help me? I went to their offices. I went to Russellville. I went to Little Rock, and I went to Fort Smith. And they sat down with me. They opened up their files and said, here are sample brochures. Here are sample recruitment forms. Here's some sample bylaws. They showed me what to do, because I had been a professional, semi-professional volunteer in Pine Bluff. I'd worked with the Junior League. I'd been on the board of the PTA. I had Girl Scouts. I knew how to volunteer, but I had no experience organizing a nonprofit volunteer program. So all these leaders were so generous. They gave me samples of everything. I came home with all this information. So here I was in Pine Bluff in my home, and I thought, now I've got to start a literacy council. I've been to the tutor workshop. I have the tutor guide or the tutor information. And then Betty and Margaret said, now that you're a tutor, you've got to become a trainer, because you got to train more tutors. So they handed me a big old handbook. We want you to become a trainer. So I had tutor training, trainer training, and files from other literacy councils, just odd files that they had given me. So that was the information I had. Plus, the big plus, I had a group of committed people in Pine Bluff. I had a board. And so we went out and we recruited people from all over the community, because that's the way you do it. Fortunately, I'd lived in Pine Bluff long enough and had volunteered there. It's a small community, really. I knew people all over. And so we were able to organize. I went to adult ed, libraries, Rotary, Junior League, banks. There was also an organization in Pine Bluff called 50 for the Future. It was a group of business people, and they provided seed money for new organizations or new groups that were trying to get organized. I went to them. I thought, okay, I'm going to go get some money there. I went to them, wrote a budget up, and I wrote a budget for $15,000 to operate for 1 year. My salary was paid for, and I thought, well, that should be about enough. So I wrote a grant for 2 years for $15,000 each year. They gave me the money, and I found out later that they would have given me double that amount if I had thought big enough. That is one of the things I learned quickly. Don't think small, think big. We started working and organizing, and I called the radio station and got some PSAs on the radio. I called the Pine Bluff commercial and got ads in the paper. I sent flyers to every church in Pine Bluff, tell them we're going to have a tutor workshop and we're going to train you to be a tutor to teach adults to read. Well, it's great to have the tutors. You need to have the students. So I went to adult ed, and they were wonderful. Not only did they give me a free office and free phone line, they also gave me access to a large room, a training room, where they put on their GED testing. They gave me that to put on tutor workshops. And most valuable, they gave me a list of 50 students in adult ed who were reading below grade level, all who wanted to get their GED but couldn't read well enough yet. And I had the names of 50 adult learners that I could match with my tutors. So we had put on this tutor workshop at Lakeside Methodist Church in the fellowship hall. I had 53 people show up for the workshop, and we had 50 students. So it worked out. It worked out. We got started, and it's kind of like getting a tiger by the tail. Okay, now what do you do? We didn't know what we were doing. The board, the people working with me, we just took each day at a time and just met each struggle at a time. I'm going to pause here and clear my voice. As the Literacy Council of Jefferson County grew, we needed a lot more office support. We only had 2 people in the office. So I called the Vista office and asked them if they would be willing to give me a Vista person to work in my office. And I also was telling them about a problem we had, that we had students calling us from Grant County and from Arkansas County, Stuttgart and Sheridan, were coming into Pine Bluff, and it was just stretching our needs. I needed tutors in both of those communities. They said, I tell you what, we'll give you 5 Vista volunteers. We want you to put 1 in Sheridan and 1 in Arkansas County, 1 in Stuttgart, and you can have 3 for your office. And one of them I put directly, she had grant background. She started writing grants, and the other 2 started doing community outreach. And it worked beautifully. Those Vistas were enthusiastic. And I tell you, Vista volunteers, they are one of the most helpful organizations that the government has ever established. They are your U.S. Peace Corps, who they are. And I can't say enough wonderful things about volunteers in service to America. At this same time, Arkansas Literacy Councils had been in existence for about 15 years. And it was still completely nonprofit, completely volunteer. We had no office, we had no phone. We were very loosely organized, but the numbers of councils around the state were growing. And by then, I think there were around 50 local literacy councils all over the state. They were in Dumas, they were down in Lake Village, they were all over. Of course, up in the Northwest, Fayetteville had a very strong, they were the strongest program in the state at that time. Fort Smith is great, Russellville, and ours was growing by leaps and bounds. But I'll never forget going to our bi-monthly ALC board meetings. We met in different communities, and usually in the basement of a local church. And every time we met, we took up dues. And the dues for the ALC board, first of all, I think everybody was on the board. I don't remember us ever electing people to the board. I think we just all kind of gathered loosely. I really don't remember exactly how it worked, but all I know is there was a bunch of us all struggling with the same issues. But the monthly dues for the ALC board was 50 cents by every 2 months. And the reason we took up the 50 cents is that we needed that for postage to mail out the newsletter. So we were a vibrant, passionate, hardworking group with no money and no structure other than a loosely formed alliance. And I will say something about working with volunteers at this point, adult literacy volunteers. I'd been a volunteer for the Junior League. I'd been a volunteer for the PTA, for Girl Scouts. And usually those, as a volunteer, I was focused on doing it for my children or for some organization. I had never met a volunteer who volunteered their time just to help one other person. They knew that they were going to have to invest time to learn to tutor and then tutor one-on-one with that student for a period. We asked them to sign up for a year, but they knew that it would probably be longer. I've never met volunteers like volunteer tutors. They're a brand and they're a breed unto themselves. And that made all the work we were doing in adult literacy so worth it. I met so many wonderful people. Over the years between 1982 and 87, Literacy Council of Jefferson County really grew exponentially. We were expanding by word of mouth. Barbara Bush's husband, George Bush, was vice president, and Barbara Bush had adopted adult literacy as her second lady project. And I had met her at the first annual conference I went that LLA conducted in Black Mountain, North Carolina. And Barbara Bush was there to give the keynote. And I was so inspired by her and by her commitment. And so her being in, and she was a very, very, as you remember, a very dynamic, talkative person. And she was talking about adult literacy everywhere. You just couldn't shut her up. She was just so enthusiastic about it, and rightly so, because the need, particularly where she was from in Texas, was great. So as the strong word of mouth happened, I was being strained and pulled in several directions, because I would get weekly phone calls from towns. Texarkana, would you please come down and put on a tutor workshop? We've got 50 librarians here who want to start a literacy program. Would you come down and do a tutor workshop? Because that's the only thing we had to do was the tutor workshop. So I would go do that, or I would go to Hope or to Arkadelphia, or and I was not the only trainer who was doing this. I had gotten my training certification, so I could go and do these tutor workshops. But we realized then, the ALC, as a group, we needed more certified trainers. So we decided our goal was going to be set up an ALC trainer network. So we started recruiting people, and our goal was, out of every single workshop, you identify one tutor that you think would make a good trainer, and you work that, you pull them in. You offer them the opportunity to work with you to be an apprentice trainer and to build that trainer network. And so we on the ALC board, that was our big project in the 80s, was to build that trainer network so that we had more people who could go around the state and do the tutor workshops. During that time period before 1989, when the Governor's Commission was established for adult literacy and things began to change for ALC, there were very exciting things going on all throughout Arkansas Literacy Councils. In Pine Bluff, we had several projects that absolutely, it's like they were conceived by our board and our board members and our committee members, but they seemed to take on a life of their own. We went to the Pine Bluff Commercial to get their help, because they were the Southeast Arkansas newspaper at the time. And Paul Greenberg was the editor-in-chief at that time, before he moved on to the Democrat Gazette. He also had children, and his children and my children were in the same public school, so I knew him. So I got a couple of my board members and met with Paul and one of his reporters, and we had a brainstorming session on how the Literacy Council and the Pine Bluff Commercial could work together. And we came up with a solution to one of our biggest problems, which was recruiting students. We had great success in recruiting tutors, but learners many times are very reluctant, as everyone knows, to come in. And so we needed to recruit more students. One of the people had a great idea. Why don't we get University of Arkansas students? University of Arkansas was a historical Black college in Pine Bluff. Get students at UAPB and students at Pine Bluff High School together and have a campaign to recruit adult literacy students. We'll call it Students March Against Illiteracy. Pine Bluff Commercial thought it was a great idea. They provided all the bright yellow t-shirts. They provided all the bright yellow flyers. They supported we got a radio station to bring out their trailer with their DJ, and we held a 2-hour event on a Saturday morning in April at Pine Bluff High School, and we had 175 UAPB students and Pine Bluff High School students there on campus. They had food, they had music, and it took a lot of work to organize this. Had a whole committee to organize it. And when they got there, we said, okay, guys, here's the deal. We are going to send you to the areas in Pine Bluff where the highest illiteracy rate, where they have the highest adult illiteracy rate. And we gave them a map, all filled out, marked here. We want you to go on these streets, and we want you to put these flyers in their doorknobs, not in the mailbox, in the doorknobs. And we said, we want you to be back in an hour. And so they all went off, these 175 kids. I don't remember exactly how many we had. And they scoured this neighborhood. It was mostly around UAPB and around Pine Bluff High School, because they're not too far apart in Pine Bluff. And then they got back to the campus at UAPB, and we had restaurant provide meals, and we had the radio station, and the kids were singing and dancing. It was a 2-hour effort, but I tell you, it was one of the biggest PR successes that we had ever had in the history of our Literacy Council. As it turned out, we recruited 134 students that day, ended up following up within the next 2 or 3 weeks, or maybe I would say the month, because you know how when you get something in your hand, you know, it takes a while for the adult learner to decide to make that phone call. Our phone number in Jefferson County was 534-7323, which is Reed. And that was a lucky thing for us that we got that number, and it made it real easy for people to call us. But that, and also not only did it recruit students, but it raised the awareness of our Literacy Council work. And we got more tutors on top of it. We didn't realize that we would do that. But in this project, we also then developed another project out of it, because when we realized how many people were calling us from this area around UAPB, we found that many of them were women, and many of them with young children. So we went to UAPB and met with there are 2 people from UAPB on our board, on our ALC board, our Literacy Council board. So we met with them and a couple of other staff to brainstorm how we could partner with UAPB to meet this issue. And they kept saying, well, you know, we have all these work study students. They're assigned to menial office tasks. They work 20 hours a week. They're paid, which will help them meet their tuition needs. And they're full-time students here. What if we assign them to be tutors? And I thought, oh my gosh, what a plan. And so what we did is we went around the neighborhood around UAPB. We just limited it to UAPB area, and we recruited female students, because it turned out that almost all the work study students were females, as well as most of the adult learners in that area. So what we did is we recruited 35 work study students, and we had almost that many learners. And the 2 things is that we all know that adult learners need, if they or to get to a tutoring class, they need transportation and childcare. So we wrote up, okay, how are we going to pay for this? So I wrote a grant to the Rockefeller Foundation. It was a $35,000 grant to start this project, and we called it Project WILL, W-I-L-L, Women in Laubach Literacy. And that money paid for a 2-year project in which we underwrote the cost of a city bus that would go around 3 days a week from 10 in the morning to 12 noon. They would pick up the learners with their children, bring them to the UAPB campus. The children would go to the daycare center that we paid a daycare worker to take care of the children, while the learners went and had their one-on-one tutoring in the libraries with the work study students. And just think about that. Here are these adult learners who may have not thought beyond their own educational level, and they were exposed to a bigger dream. It was helpful for the work study students to work with these women, and it was such an inspiring project. We did that project for 2 years, And I wish that we could have repeated it, because it was, I believe that it was something that was the most meaningful thing we did, working with these women. We also worked with women in the Pine Bluff prisons. At that time, the women's prison was in Pine Bluff. I got a phone call from the chaplain and one of the instructors at the GED testing, GED educational instruction program at the prison. And they told us about all the problems of women whose reading level was not high enough. And they asked if she said, we have women in this prison who we believe read very well. And then they have friends who are here in the prison who don't read well. We've got a ready-made match. We would like to ask you to come out and train 35 inmates to tutor one of their friends in prison. I mean, we didn't have to match or recruit those tutors. They were already matched. So we did 3 nights, because the women had the regular jobs in prison, and at night they would come for 2 hours, and we would go into the prison behind all the doors and all the locks and do a tutor workshop. But you always hear about the joke about having a captive audience. Well, literally they were, but it was more than that. I think that those tutor workshops we had done in the prison were the most inspirational that I have ever done. Excuse me, I've got to drink some water. These women in this tutor workshop came to help another person, someone they cared a lot about. And I don't know that, I believe the success rate was in the high 90 percentile. We did that tutor training several years in the prisons before later the prisons were moved to Newport and to other sites in Arkansas. But I was never more inspired by tutors than I was when I was working with those women in those workshops. And we had so much fun. There was laughter, it was light, it was not what you would think inside a prison would be like. It was a wonderful experience. And the last project I'm going to talk about is the one that really, I think, helped ALC more than any. In Pine Bluff, we really had a very close community. And I was blessed by the fact that a lot of people would volunteer their help. Well, one day I got a phone call from Knox Nelson. Knox was the senator in our state legislature and had been a senator representing Jefferson County and other counties in Southeast Arkansas. And he was a very powerful senator in the legislature. He called me and he said, Barbara, he said, the work you all are doing with the Literacy Council has really touched my heart. My father never learned to read and write. And all my life, I kept thinking there's something I want to do to change, to make a difference. He said, how could I work with you all? How could I help the Literacy Council? I didn't know at the time what we were going to do, but I talked with him, and then I went directly to our board and our fundraising committee, let me tell you, talk about lucky to have certain people on your board. Montine McNulty was on our board at that time, and she was working with the fund development. So Montine and 2 other board members and I met with Knox Nelson, and we brainstormed, what can we do? How can we work together? And it became very clear that Knox Nelson's power in the state to raise money was immense. So unlike the small thinking that I did when I asked for a measly $15,000 from 50 for the Future, Montine said, we are going to raise $250,000. And we're going to do this statewide. We're going to hold it in the Pine Bluff Convention Center. And we're going to get John Brummett from the Democrat Gazette, get the columnist to come in and be the master of ceremonies. And this will be money that will help Arkansas Literacy Council. Now, this was 1980, around 86, 87. It was before the Governor's Commission. So ALC still had no telephone and had no office. They were still the loosely 100% volunteer organization. They were like 18 years old, you know, as an organization, but no financial support. Well, the bottom line from this fundraiser was that, first of all, Montine organized a great group of people from the community in Pine Bluff and around the state whom she knew. And they went to all the big funders. They went to AT&T, they went to Blue Cross Blue Shield. And of course, Knox Nelson used his influence to get to recruit money, donations. And then they got local, they did a phone bank in our office. And I was so nervous. I was standing in the back. My stomach was churning watching them do all this work. That was not my gift, to get out and to raise money like that, but it was Montine's and it was this committee's. And they raised a commitment of $350,000. And we put on this event, and it was attended by everybody in the state in the convention center. It was a wonderful, wonderful event. And they used them, and we also had an agreement that it was also Literacy Council's fundraising event for the year. And we would get the first $40,000, which was part of our budget for that year. We had other grants and things, but that was our budget. So first 310,000 left over from that 350,000 went to establish the Arkansas Adult Literacy. Stop. What? There's an E word that I just lost. Hold on. Do I have it in my notes?
An E word?
The Adult Literacy
Council.
No, this was the Arkansas Adult Literacy. It's where it's like a foundation, but what is the E word, Nancy?
Education? Endowment?
Endowment. No, it wasn't. Was it an endowment?
I don't remember.
It was not an endowment. It was an organization that is, this is, I hate it when I lose words.
And I don't think I've heard about it.
Well, Montine became the executive director. And remember, I asked you about it, if they had any money left. The Arkansas Adult Literacy, well, I'm going to call it the endowment. That's,
yeah, but I don't, I just thought she called it the Knox Nelson Literacy Fund or something like that.
No, we established the Arkansas Adult Literacy Foundation. It wasn't a foundation, but that's what we call it because we awarded grants out. And it supported ALC at the time a little bit. There was grants awarded to ALC, but okay, fund. I'm gonna call it fund. There you go. Okay. So of the 350,000, the first 40,000 went to ALC, to Literacy Council of Jefferson County, and the remaining 310 was to establish the Arkansas Adult Literacy Foundation. And as it turned out, Montine McNulty became its director over after that, and it was used to award grants and seed money to adult literacy programs in the state, as well as supporting some of the work of Arkansas Literacy Councils. It's also at this time that PBS and ABC launched their Project Literacy US. The whole United States was becoming aware of it. And then at that time, Governor Clinton established his governor's Arkansas Literacy, Arkansas Commission on Adult Literacy. It was also at this time that Governor Clinton established his Commission on Adult Literacy. As one of the local literacy council directors, I was asked to serve on that commission, as well as other literacy directors and business people and representatives from UAPB and UALR, and it was a statewide commission. And it was from there that the Arkansas Literacy Councils was finally funded and underwritten and became a real funded, stable organization. And that was after almost 20 years in existence. What a tenacious and absolutely wonderful organization that it worked that long, and it deserved that kind of state support. It was also at this time that I started working with Laubach Literacy Action and going to some of their state conferences. They had asked me to come and do some VISTA training in Colorado because they had recruited 45 VISTAs to start literacy programs in Colorado. So I went up there and worked with other LLA trainers to do a week-long training for tutor training, program management training, and it was a wonderful opportunity for me to work with the national staff. Little did I realize how my life was going to change after that. One afternoon, I got a phone call from Peter Waite, the executive director of Laubach Literacy Action in Syracuse. And he called to give me an offer that I couldn't refuse, so to speak. He said that they had a staff opening in their national office in Syracuse. It was for a training coordinator, a tutor training coordinator, or trainer training coordinator. And would I be willing to move to Syracuse and take the job? The first thing I asked him when he said that, first after I shut my mouth from being so surprised, I asked him, I said, are you asking me to apply for the job, or are you offering me the job? He said, Barbara, we've worked with you for 3 years now. We're offering you the job. I talked to my children, talked to my mother. Everybody encouraged me. I talked to my board. They were excited for me, but of course they realized that they had work to do because we needed to have a transition. I had 3 real important things to do. Number 1, I had to find a new executive director. Number 2, I had to sell my house. And number 3, I had a 17-year-old daughter who was going to be a senior in high school. And there was no way under God's green earth that she was going to move with me to Syracuse, New York, to go to high school. And the second part of that, I was going to be traveling all across the United States doing trainings. I wasn't going to be there a lot of the time. Providence stepped in. My house sold in 2 weeks. My family encouraged me to do it. The woman who ran the project, Women in Laubach Literacy at UAPB, she applied for the job of executive director, and it was a wonderful fit. We had worked with her for 3 years. She was like a director in training, really. And then Ellen's got a phone call from her very best friend, and she said, Ellen, I want you to talk to my mom. And her mom came on the phone and said, Ellen, we have a second bedroom. We want you to live with us your senior year of high school while your mom is in Syracuse. And then she was planning on going on to college. So it worked out. And I was also turning 50 that year. And as we all know, about 50 decades birthdays. It's an opportunity to review your life, to think over where you've been and wonder where you're going. And I read something in a book about the 50s decade, is that is a time to evaluate the path you're on and maybe to consider, do you want to put on new sandals and travel new paths? And when I heard that quote, I made the decision to move, to leave Arkansas and to go on a new adventure, take a new challenge. I'm watching the time. We're 4:14. I think I can cover this last part in about 10 minutes. Are you okay with this, Nancy?
Take whatever time you need. This is great.
Oh, okay, okay. Moving to Syracuse to take the job with Laubach Literacy Action was not as hard as I thought it would be. Syracuse is about the size of Little Rock, North Little Rock, and it is a similar kind of town, same kind of cost of living. And I went into a ready-made family of the staff at Laubach Literacy Action. They welcomed me with open arms, and they were used to bringing in staff from out of town, because when they hired a new staff, they're in a national organization, they usually hired people from out of town. So they knew how to welcome somebody and to help them. They helped me find a place to live. They oriented me and gave me lots of love and support for a long, long time. One of the things I found out when I moved there is that Laubach Literacy is very good at doing tutor training and trainer training and trainer certification. But as I found out when I tried to start the Literacy Council of Jefferson County, there is precious little program management resources or training. Do you think about it? Dr. Frank Laubach started out doing the Each One Teach One, working one-on-one, tutoring people, teaching people to read. When he went around the country, he went with tutors. He didn't meet with program manager people. He didn't meet with the community leaders. He met with people who wanted to be tutors. The whole focus of Laubach Literacy Action was instructional based, which was wonderful. But as program people tried to start literacy councils like I did, we didn't have the resources we need. So within about 2 years, I was promoted to Director of Field Services and got our staff together, and we decided to refocus the work we were doing and to evaluate what is needed. We would continue to offer tutor training and trainer training, but we wanted to develop program management training. So we hired a program management director, person on staff to coordinate program management work. We began to work with state organizations like ALC when they had their state conferences. So to add a program management strand to their conferences, because when you went to LLA conferences or state conferences back in the day, you saw a lot of tutor workshops and trainer workshops related to those, but very few program management workshops. And so we increased, we researched and encouraged more program management strands. We started offering program management pre-conference workshops. And that was our field services focus for the entire time that I was there. We realized that that was something that was very much needed by our local councils. We also began to collaborate with Literacy Volunteers of America, LVA, because they had a completely different focus. They were headquartered in Syracuse. Both organizations grew up right next door to each other. It was amazing. Only 2 adult literacy organizations in the United States, and they both were in Syracuse because they were cousins. They were just separate organizations. So we started collaborating with LVA because they had a very strong program management training strand. So we started adapting and using some of their materials. One of them was called 50-50. And the philosophy behind 50-50 is that any local literacy council should spend 50% of its time, effort, and money recruiting tutors and students. And then they should spend the other 50% supporting those tutors and students. And it wasn't that way in most literacy councils. They mostly focused on the recruiting and the training and not on the supporting and retaining the tutors and the students. There was a lot of tutor dropout because of the fact that they weren't perhaps being supported. We saw that as a real problem in the local councils. We also developed a program management handbook. That was a 2-year project that our program management director coordinator he had been a program coordinator in California, and we stole him from California and brought him back, and he oversaw the development of the program management handbook. And that was a big help to give, because remember when I went to that first tutor workshop, they gave me a tutor workbook and they gave me a trainer handbook, but there was no program management handbook. I'll never forget that, driving back from Dumas. Where's my program management handbook? So the minute we could do that in Syracuse, I broke down and cried the day that thing came off the press. Fortunately, we were lucky to have a New Readers Press, a publishing house, that published it for us, and it was a big success. We also realized that looking at let me start over. I began to have a new view of the state organizations from my viewpoint in Syracuse. I was going around the country visiting state organizations all over the country, and I realized they weren't all like ALC. I thought every state had an ALC. I thought everybody had that wonderful organization that was formed by volunteers and then was funded by the state. Not true. So what the next focus that we started to develop in field service work was to develop state organizations. One of the biggest challenges was Texas. Here's this, our neighboring state did not have a state adult literacy organization. And I was so naive after growing up with Arkansas literacy councils and seeing we're a small, cohesive state. I didn't realize how lucky we were to have that joint and common goal, and how dedicated those early workers were, those early volunteers. I thought every state had that until I got to Syracuse. So we needed to start some program management work for states in our field services department. And so I recruited a state coordinator, someone who had been involved with the state organization, and his job was to help work with all the state organizations. In 1993, Laubach Literacy was looking around for a place to have our national conference. I was on, as field services director, I was on the committee to help serve. And I will have to say, I was a little prejudiced, and we had not had a national LLA conference in the South in several years. So after a lot of discussion and work with Marie Bruno, so after consulting with the Arkansas Literacy Council Executive Director, Marie Clinton Bruno, Laubach Literacy Action decided that we would hold our national conference there. And I think it was in 1993 or 94. I'll never forget how exciting it was to come home to Arkansas and to see all my ALC friends and all of my colleagues, and to introduce them to my Laubach Literacy Action colleagues, and it's to watch them interacting with each other. It felt like I had two homes. I had Arkansas and I had Syracuse, and they were all together in one room or one place, and it was wonderful. One evening, we had all gone out to dinner, some of our LLA staff, and we were walking back from the restaurant, and we passed by that Junction Bridge. It goes over the Arkansas River, and it was night. And Peter said, let's go over and walk over the bridge. So about 6 of us from the Syracuse office, we walked out to the middle of the bridge, and we all looked back. And if you've ever looked back at night from that bridge, it is the most glorious view of the skyline of Little Rock. You can see the Arkansas River. You can see the state capitol over here. I mean, it is just beautiful. And Peter looked at me and he said, Barbara, I can't believe you left this place to come work with us. And I said, well, This is where I love. This is where I love and my heart will always live. So it was a wonderful thing to be in Arkansas with my LLA staff colleagues and my ALC colleagues. And it was a wonderful conference too. Marie will tell you. And Betty Harp was the program director of a program coordinator for that conference. She's the one who organized all the workshops, and she did a fabulous job. It was really well done. One more strong thing that we needed to do in Laubach Literacy Action, we had established a program management system. We had resources, we had staff now, but there were no national standards for what composed an effective adult literacy program. So we partnered with LVA, and in the national staff, we met for about 2 years, and we developed the Laubach Literacy. Well, actually, by that time, Laubach Literacy and LVA were getting ready to merge. So it's now called the Pro Literacy Program Accreditation System. And I worked with LVA staff as we developed those 10 accreditation standards that set the goals and the achievement for a local literacy council and what needs to be in place for it to be effective. Something like board development resources, good fund development system, student and tutor recruitment plans, student and tutor support plans. There's so many things that need to be in place to say that this is an accredited program. It is meeting those standards. So I guess when I left Laubach Literacy and retired in year 2000, I think that accreditation system was probably the project that we had worked on together there, of which I was most proud, because I knew how it would help every local program. Because if you want to be good and be a good program and be a quality program, you need to know how high to aim. And many literacy councils didn't aim high enough. And this set the standards for how they would operate. So after retiring in 2000, I came back to Arkansas, and I still worked part-time for Laubach Literacy. I was their regional representative for the 6-state region. It was Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, and Missouri. And my job was to work with the local regional states and try to strengthen their conferences and the work they were doing. I also worked as a national accreditation reviewer, which means I would go to local literacy council programs around the country, and they had applied for accreditation, national accreditation through Pro Literacy. And my job was to review all of their paperwork and all of their materials, and then to make a reviewing report to the national committee as to whether or not to afford them accreditation. And that was a lot of fun. I still got to have I've had a relationship with my Laubach Literacy colleagues, my Pro Literacy colleagues, and I was able to be retired, but yet to maintain that relationship. I was very happy in 2003 when I got a phone call from someone on the Arkansas Literacy Council's board asking me if I'd be willing to serve on the board for a term. And I was thrilled to be asked. It's fun to go back to ALC. And I served on the ALC board from 2003 to 2008. And then, of course, as the bylaws state, you have to rotate off. And I was very busy with children and grandchildren during those 4 years. But in 2012, I got a request to go back onto the board to serve another term. I was very pleased to be on the ALC board at the Arkansas Literacy Council board at that time because a wonderful opportunity came up, and that was, well, it was a challenge and an opportunity at the same time. our executive director had to suddenly retire. And when he did, it was in February or March. And as we all know, our fiscal year in March, April, May are very busy times for the grants and aids to council grants, for the annual meeting. I mean, it's a busy, busy time. And when our executive director had to leave, I was vice president of the board, and Peggy Sissel Phelan was the president of the board. So the two of us and several other board members got our heads together, and we had to reorganize and make ALC operate during that time frame. Our first job was to try to hire a new executive director, and luckily for us, Nancy Lenhart walked in our office to apply. The first thing we saw was her brilliant smile, and the second thing we noticed is she was the most enthusiastic applicant we had ever had. In fact, when she interviewed with us, she said, "Now I want to know what this executive director's job really requires, because I don't want a token job." At that time, Nancy did not know about the fact that our executive director had to retire suddenly. And she did not know the straits that we were in at that point. And we assured her that it would never be a token job, that it would be a full-time and plus job. And I think she would say to you all, that is true. But the best part about it is she brought to this job an experience as working in a large statewide nonprofit. She also had a level head and a sense of organization. I watched her take notes. She writes the neatest handwriting, and she makes the most detailed notes. And I knew the minute we met her that she was the right person for the job. And that has been true. And it has been one of the best things that's happened during my second tenure on the board. And the second thing that's happened that thrills me to death is that right at the very beginning, actually before Nancy was hired, Peggy Sissel Phelan and I decided that the Grants and Aids to Council's funding, the GAC Council funding, was being organized and run it was not an impartial process. We believe there needed to be state standards on what constitutes an effective literacy council. In order to qualify for these GAC funds, they needed to meet certain standards. So I proposed to our board that we adopt the pro-literacy national accreditation standards to apply to the GAC process. And I think that has really strengthened us as an organization. And as Arkansas Literacy Council's changed its name to the Adult Learning Alliance of Arkansas, it's really given us the substance and the proof that our councils deserve the funding that we are awarding them. Serving on the ALC board and being a part of the work of Arkansas Literacy Councils and Adult Learning Alliance has been a life-changing experience for me. Little did I realize when I became a VISTA in 1982 that my personal and my professional life would take a completely different tact. And it has been nothing but good and nothing but exciting and nothing but rewarding. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
4:33, you got it done in 1 hour.
And you're done.
Yes.
That was wonderful. I mean, I learned so much. Wow, that was great. I didn't realize all the stuff that you did with the Pine Bluff Council. Just incredible.
It was a very busy 7 years.
Yeah,
it really was. It was wonderful.
And it's a shame that it went away.
Well,
for a
things
while.
coming, ebb and flow, you know,
Yeah,
the ebb and
yeah,
flow. And we had 50 councils
yeah.
back then.
And we have
now,
half that now.
right. So
Yeah,
I believe, but see, thankfully, ALA's got this stability now.
yeah, yeah.
And hopefully stability with you for a few more years, I think I heard you say.
For a few more years, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay. All right. Well, start recruiting, start grooming your successor, Nancy.
There you go. There you go. Well, thank you so much, Barbara. Now I just need to get Bill's video message so I can just figure out how to integrate the three of you, and to build off of what he says. So once that happens, then we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, I was thrilled that TJ volunteered to help you with some of the computer research.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that'll